Hello there. I'm David Carrico. My wife Donna and I operate a ministry in Evansville, Indiana. We have spent several years researching various aspects of the occult and have been used by God to lead several occultists to accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. One of the areas of research which we have specialized in is SRA, or Satanic Ritual Abuse. We have a burden to expose the truth about SRA and to help promote understanding for its victims. In this video, I want to share with you several aspects of SRA. We will start by defining ritual abuse. We will find within that definition several elements of satanic ritual abuse as described by survivors. Once we have a working definition, we will look at evidence of its existence. Then we will examine the claims of those who say that satanic ritual abuse does not occur. And finally, we will look at the origins of SRA and how the practice of human sacrifice has been propagated to the present day through the mystery religions. SRA involves crimes against children that are so horrible that many people don't want to believe it exists. I assure you that I don't want to believe it either, but due to the evidence, I have no choice but to acknowledge that SRA is a reality. 4 states have passed laws making the ritualistic abuse of children illegal. A legal definition of ritual abuse can be found in a bill passed by the legislature of the state of Illinois. The law went into effect in January of 1993. The act states that a person is guilty of a felony when he commits any of 7 acts upon a child or in the presence of a child during a ceremony or ritual. A person commits ritual abuse when he 1. Actually or in simulation tortures, mutilates, or sacrifices any warm-blooded animal or human being. 2. Forces, ingestion, injection, or other application of any narcotic drug, hallucinogen, or anesthetic for the purpose of dulling sensitivity, cognition, recollection of, or resistance to any criminal activity. 3. Forces, ingestion, or external application of human or animal urine, feces, flesh, blood, bones, body secretions, non-prescribed drugs, or chemical compounds. 4. Involves the child in a mock unauthorized or unlawful marriage ceremony with another person or representation of any force or deity, followed by sexual contact with the child. 5. Places a living child into a coffin or open grave containing a human corpse or remains. 6. Threatens death or serious harm to a child, his or her parents, family, pets, or friends, which instills a well-founded fear in the child that the threat will be carried out. Or 7. Unlawfully dissects, mutilates, or incinerates a human corpse. Several other states have passed laws concerning ritual abuse of children. The definition in each case is similar. In order to define satanic ritual abuse, we must first identify the nature of Satan. Satan is a fallen angel who wants to usurp the place of God in worship. Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 14, discusses the fall of Satan from heaven when he tried to be like God. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Satan and a third of the angels who followed him were cast out of heaven. They are now commonly referred to as demons rather than fallen angels. Satan commands a host of demons whose nature is identical to his own. 1 Peter 5:8 warns us to be sober, be vigilant, Because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. In his first letter to the Corinthians, Paul wrote, But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils and not to God, and I would not that you should have fellowship with devils. Paul knew that all pagan religions worship demons rather than the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the Bible. Demonic ritual abuse would involve any ritual abuse which took place in a ceremony which gave praise or worship to one or more demons. We know from Paul's writings that all pagan gods are demons. In warfare, a general is often given credit for the accomplishments of his troops. Since all demons have the same nature as Satan, and Satan is the leader of all demons, satanic ritual abuse includes any ritual abuse which takes place during the praise or worship of any demon or false god. Our working definition of satanic ritual abuse then requires that the ritual abuse occur as part of a ritual which worships Satan, another demon, or any false god. You may be surprised to know that satanic ritual abuse is really not a new problem. God spoke of satanic ritual abuse to Moses in Leviticus chapter 20, verses 1 through 8. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Again you shall say to the children of Israel, Whoever of the children of Israel, or of the strangers who sojourn in Israel, who gives any of his descendants to Molech, he shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I will set my face against that man, and will cut him off from his people, because he has given some of his descendants to Molech to defile my sanctuary and profane my holy name. And if the people of the land should in any way hide their eyes from the man when he gives some of his descendants to Molech, and they do not kill him, then I will set my face against that man and against his family, and I will cut him off from his people and all who prostitute themselves with him to commit harlotry with Molech. Notice here that God speaks not only against those who would sacrifice children to the demon, but also all those who know that the sacrifice is happening and don't try to stop it. Continuing to read, And the person who turns after mediums and familiar spirits to prostitute himself with them, I will set my face against that person and cut him off from his people. Sanctify yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am the Lord your God. And you shall keep my statutes and perform them. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. The Bible tells us that children were put to death in worship of Moloch. Additionally, sexual acts were committed as part of the ceremonies. Several other scriptures deal with the sacrifice of children to false gods. Leviticus chapter 18, verse 21 warns the Israelites not to let any of their seed pass through the fire to Molech. And thou shalt not let any of thy seed pass through the fire to Molech. Neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. God detested the sacrifice of children to false gods so much that he wanted the Israelites to kill all men who sacrificed their children. God told Moses that he would turn his face against any man who failed to kill another man he knew had sacrificed his children. 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 31 deals with children who were sacrificed to gods other than Molech. And the Abites made Nibhaz and Tartak, and the Sepharvites burnt their children in fire to Adremelech and Anamelech, the gods of Sepharvim. Verses 16 and 17 of 2 Kings chapter 17 reveal that some of the Israelites sacrificed their children to Baal. And they left all the commandments of the Lord their God and made them molten images, even 2 calves, and made a grove, and worshipped all the host of heaven, and served Baal. And they caused their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire and used divination and enchantments and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. Jeremiah chapter 19 verses 3 through 5 reveals that the judgment of God will fall upon any nation which allows child sacrifice. And say, Hear ye the word of the Lord, O kings of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel. Behold, I will bring evil upon this place, the which whosoever heareth, his ears shall tingle. Because they have forsaken me, and have estranged this place, and have burned incense in it unto other gods, whom neither they nor their fathers have known, nor the kings of Judah, and have filled this place with the blood of innocents. They have built also the high places of Baal, to burn their sons with fire for burnt offerings unto Baal, which I commanded not, nor spake it, neither came it into my mind. Since we know that all false gods are in reality demons, and all demons are following Satan, the scriptural evidence that satanic ritual abuse has occurred is uncontestable. The demonic practices of the ancient Canaanites did not cease when the children of Israel invaded the Promised Land. They have been passed down through the centuries within the mystery religions. The teaching of the mystery religions has been preserved in the literature and practice of several secret societies. The very fact that several states have enacted laws concerning ritual abuse demonstrates that the problem is still with us. This is really not surprising because the nature of man has not changed. The legal definitions are broad for several obvious reasons. The element of religion has not been placed in the law to prevent perpetrators from using freedom of religion as a defense. If laws applied only to satanic ritual abuse, some who worship Lucifer would deny that Lucifer and Satan are the same being. That may sound absurd, but I have seen documents from organizations which lift up Lucifer, yet deny the existence of Satan. Additionally, all ritual abuse does not contain satanic elements. The broad definition within the Illinois law serves to convict without having to prove Satanism per se. While most ritual abuse cases never come to trial, there have been several criminal prosecutions that resulted in convictions. In most cases, the ritual aspect was not introduced in court, but was clearly indicated by the accounts of the victims. Numerous civil cases incorporating claims of ritual abuse have been successfully litigated. In August 1984, there were two cases which resulted in convictions. In Niles, Michigan, Richard Barkman, the husband of a daycare operator, was convicted. In Miami, Frank and Ileana Fuster went to prison because of abuses at their Country Walk Daycare Center. The case has been impressively documented in the book Unspeakable Acts and in the ABC docudrama of the same title. In September 1984, in Malden, Massachusetts, the Fells Acre daycare case culminated in guilty verdicts against Violet Amirault and her daughter Cheryl Amirault Lefebvre. They were given sentences of from 8 to 20 years. In December 1987, in Roseburg, Oregon, 3 Gallup Christian daycare facilities were the scene of crimes that resulted in the conviction of a minister, his wife, and his son. Mary Lou Gallup's conviction was reversed because of a discovery violation, but Ed Gallup Sr. and Ed Chips Gallup Jr. both served their sentences. In the same month in Lehigh, Utah, Alan Hadfield was convicted of abusing his own children in a case in which many adults in the community were identified as perpetrators of satanic ritual abuse. The case was documented in the PBS program Promise Not to Tell. In September 1988 in Santa Rosa, California, Darrell Ball and Charlotte Thrakill plea bargained on molestation charges and were sentenced to substantial prison terms. The prosecutor's opening statement referred to the ritual aspect of the crimes, and the child victims described satanic ceremonies that included murders. In May 1989 in Stuart, Florida, James Toward pled guilty to charges arising from the sexual abuse of over 100 children at the Montessori school where he was principal. 6 children testified. Toward received a 27-year sentence. His secretary received 10 years. In April 1990 in Thurston County, Washington, Paul Ingram, a former Thurston County Sheriff's deputy, confessed shortly after being confronted. Ingram had been involved in ritual abuse for many years. 2 other law enforcement officers allegedly were involved, but charges eventually were dismissed because the victims were too traumatized to appear in court. Ingram was sentenced. In December 1990 in Akron, Ohio, Philip and Michael Schmidt pled guilty to molesting children who were attending the daycare operated by their grandmother, Hazel Riggs, who was sentenced on a lesser charge. The Denver Post story on the case included ritual allegations by a child victim. Prosecution was handled by the Attorney General's office. In March 1992, in Mansfield, Ohio, 2 teenage babysitters at the First Presbyterian Church were sent to prison for abusing children during church functions. Lawrence Rode, age 19, was sentenced to 14 years, and Scott Butner received from 5 to 10 years. Children all told of being taken from the church and witnessing murder, cannibalism, and mutilation of corpses. Parents of about 60 children have urged that charges be filed against other church members who allegedly were involved, but the grand jury has declined to indict anyone else. In April 1992 in Edmonton, North Carolina, Robert Kelly, owner of the Little Rascals Daycare Center, was found guilty on 99 out of 100 counts of sexual abuse and sentenced to 12 consecutive life terms. 12 children testified in court, and one young victim described how the perpetrators would pray, "Oh devil, destroy these children." As of April 1993, 1 other defendant had been convicted and 5 others remained to be tried. The most recent conviction was in 1992 in Austin, Texas. Francis and Daniel Keller were convicted. One victim disclosed how he was told that his arm bone had been taken out and replaced with Satan's. He watched them as they poured jars of blood on his arm. Ritual abuse, and more specifically, satanic ritual abuse in the name of false gods, does occur today, as these convictions prove. These cases represent only the tip of the iceberg. There are many victims who never come forward due to fear or, in some cases, death. Ritual abuse is not conducted in public, but always occurs in seclusion, where the risk of exposure is minimized. Those who have accidentally discovered rituals in remote areas have sometimes become victims themselves, and since ritual abuse participants are reluctant to testify against one another, many cases cannot be prosecuted because of a lack of sufficient evidence. I have become concerned with the recent criticism by those who would deny the very existence of SRA. This controversy has made it even more difficult for the victims of these satanic crimes to get help. In some cases where substantial evidence could have been provided, the cases were not investigated diligently because the prosecutors doubted the reality of SRA. Many times, prosecutors are reluctant to mention satanic elements of the crime when the case comes to trial, thinking that it will make conviction more difficult. Sometimes prosecutors and others in the criminal justice system are reluctant to do an adequate investigation in a particular case because they deny the existence of SRA. Their denial determines the course of the investigation, or rather, it prevents an adequate investigation from ever occurring. An excellent example of a law enforcement officer with this mindset is Ken V. Lanning. Lanning is a special supervisory agent assigned to the Behavioral Science Unit at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. Lanning has stated for the record, "After all the hype and hysteria is put aside, the realization sets in that most satanic or occult activity involves the commission of no crimes, and that which does usually involves commission of relatively minor crimes such as trespassing, vandalism, cruelty to animals, or petty thievery." Mr. Lanning's bias regarding the existence of hardcore satanic crime has forced him to reach some ridiculous conclusions. The 1988 ritual murder trial of Clifford St. Joseph in the state of California is a case in point. These are the documented facts in the case. The corpse was mutilated so badly that it could not be identified. The corpse had been sodomized. The wrist, ankles, back, and buttocks had been slashed. The testicles were mutilated. The blood had been drained from the body. The right eye had been removed and the eye socket filled with hot wax. A pentagram was carved into the chest of the victim. After reviewing the evidence, the FBI's Mr. Lanning determined that it was not a satanic murder, but a homosexually motivated sex crime. The bias of Mr. Lanning and some others is so extreme that one wonders what evidence would be required to convince them that satanic ritual abuse exists. The traditional belief that child molesters should be held responsible for their actions and that the victims are innocent is not accepted by some in our criminal justice system. They try to attribute part of the blame to the victim, minimizing the responsibility of the perpetrator for his actions. A case in point is provided again by Ken Lanning of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Lanning wrote a chapter for the 1992 book on Satanism and ritual abuse called Out of Darkness. The book is currently published by Lexington Books. Lanning's chapter is entitled A Law Enforcement Perspective on Allegations of Ritual Abuse. In it, Lanning writes, "There is another myth that is still with us and is far less likely to be discussed. This is the myth of the victim as a completely innocent little girl walking down the street, minding her own business. It may be more important to dispel this myth than the myth of stranger danger, especially when talking about the sexual exploitation of children in child sex rings. Society seems to have a problem dealing with any sexual abuse case in which the offender is not completely bad or the victim is not completely good. Society seems to find it difficult to deal with child victims who simply behave like human beings and respond to the attention and affection of offenders by voluntarily and repeatedly returning to the offender's home. It confuses us to see the victims in child pornography giggling or laughing. At professional conferences on child sexual abuse, child prostitution is almost never discussed. It is the form of sexual victimization of children most unlike the stereotype of the innocent girl victim. Child prostitutes, by definition, participate in and often initiate their victimization. Furthermore, child prostitutes and the participants in child sex rings are frequently boys. One therapist recently told the author that a researcher's data on child molestation were misleading because many of the child victims in question were child prostitutes. This implies that child prostitutes are not real victims. Whether or not it seems fair, when adults and children have sex, the child is always the victim. Examining the thinking of law enforcement officials like Lanning makes me wonder just how far some in the criminal justice system go to protect the rights of the criminal at the expense of the victim. I believe that any attempt to shift any part of the blame away from the perpetrator and onto the child is despicable. Isaiah wrote in chapter 5, verses 20 and 21, "Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight." In addition to bias within some portions of the criminal justice system, bias exists in secular media as well. A November 29, 1993 article in Time magazine is a good example. The cover story, entitled "Is Freud Dead?" presented a strongly biased negative opinion against the existence of satanic ritual abuse. The article contained the following: "If some of the recovered memories of familial childhood abuse sound fanciful, the recollections of satanic ritual abuse are downright bizarre. But could such satanic rituals be that commonplace, let alone exist at all? Yet law enforcement authorities report that not one shred of reliable evidence has turned up to support these claims. No documented marks of torture, no bones of sacrificed adults, infants, or fetuses, and no reputable eyewitnesses. The fact that this article appeared after the previously mentioned convictions were widely publicized demonstrates that some who deny the existence of SRA have not done a credible job of research. It is also the position of this ministry that there is substantial hard evidence to prove the existence of SRA. The examples I have provided are sufficient to convince all who are objective. Only those who don't want to be confused by the facts will continue to deny the obvious. Despite the flood of hard evidence that confirms the reality of satanic crime, the backlash against the existence of SRA continues. It often takes the form of what has come to be known as false memory syndrome. The following quote is also from the Time magazine article, "Is Freud Dead?" An increasing number of recovered memory accusers have recanted, and some have reunited with their families and joined them in suing the therapists and clinics they claim led them astray. Many of them are among the more than 7,000 individuals and families who have sought assistance from the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, a Philadelphia-based organization that has taken the lead in publicizing the wrongdoing and in helping the victims of recovered memory therapy. Pamela Freud, who co-founded FMSF in 1992, has yet to be reconciled with her accuser daughter. The so-called false memory syndrome has become the biggest weapon in the arsenal of those that would deny the existence of SRA. The facts concerning false memory syndrome are the following. False memory syndrome is not a recognized medical or psychological diagnosis and does not appear in the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, DSM-3, or the soon-to-be-released DSM-4. False memory syndrome is the invention of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. The False Memory Syndrome Foundation was founded in March 1992 by